All right, my name is Heather Gray, and the program is Just Peace, and I want to welcome you all to our show this evening. I'm looking so forward to this discussion. We're going to be talking about labor issues here at WRFG's Just Peace. Before I go any further, though, I want you to know that the opinions expressed on Just Peace do not necessarily reflect those of Radio Free Georgia Broadcasting Foundation, Incorporated, its staff or volunteers, and portions of the program are pre-recorded. I am so pleased to tell you all I have here in the studio Gary Washington,
pleased to be here.
The first producer, actually, of the labor program.
Thank you very much.
And also Ben Speight. But Gary, tell us about the show this evening.
We're going to have a very exciting program. Anytime Ben comes to the studios of WRFG, it is electrifying, and he has a lot of information. Ben is an organizer with the Teamsters Union, Local 728. Ben is somebody you should know. You should get pen and pencil handy to make notes, because he's got some incredible information. If you work a job, any job, and you don't have a union, your voice is a single voice. Ben is an organizer with the Teamsters Union. I'm a member of the Teamsters Union, so I know what it's all about. Unionism. Unionism is power. We must be organized. So it's a great honor for me to introduce Ben Speight, organizer of the Teamsters Union Local 728. I want to first start off and dedicate today's program to Pauline Newman and her daughter, Evelyn Newman. They gave me so much inspiration and support when I did the labor forum. Evelyn Newman used to work at the anti-Klan network that became Consumer for Democratic
the Center for Democratic Renewal.
Yeah, the Center for Democratic Renewal. She provided me with some valuable information about Klan members in the 80s that were on my job. They were two union stewards who were in the Grand Dragons of the Klan. And I have to thank Evelyn for providing me necessary information about that, because they end up picketing the labor forum here at WRFG. If you can imagine that, 10 cone heads outside with their idiocy, you kind of wonder how they were brought up. So I want to dedicate today's program to Pauline Newman and Evelyn Newman, who is the daughter of Pauline, and say to Pauline Newman, happy belated Mother's Day. Without further ado, we want to move into, I want to introduce you to Ben Speight and let him have a few words, because we want to talk about a demonstration that's going on that we went to this morning. Mike is yours, Ben.
Well, it's good to be here with you, Heather, and for Just Peace. It's good to be here on WRFG and Just Peace program and join you, Heather, and Gary. And Gary, I always got to give you much props.
Right on.
Because you're the messenger that turned me on to the labor movement and showed me that there is a way that we can make a difference in the South.
Absolutely.
We can bring black and white together to fight for justice on the job, for economic justice and social justice. But it really starts, as I've learned, in creating social change. It starts with where we have the most power. And our economic system relies on us doing two things: buying stuff and working to buy stuff.
There you go.
And I focus on the latter, like you do.
Right. Absolutely.
And so they profit off our labor, and that's where we realize our own power.
Yeah.
And I appreciate all your leadership in communicating that message here in Atlanta.
So what happened today, Ben? What about this demonstration? What was it about?
Well, this morning, Gary and I, along with other labor supporters, went up to off of Northcrest Road there on the north side of town, north end of the perimeter. And, we don't normally demonstrate outside of quote-unquote union-friendly companies. This time, however, we're learning that a company that had been marketing itself as a union-friendly employer started to have a change of direction. And that company is called Tucker Castleberry. They're a place that unions and others that want to ensure that all their publications are printed by union printers have the union bug on all their literature. Tucker Castleberry actually prints our local union's newsletters, and they do other stuff for the labor movement here. Well, they have a union division, okay, that they're in bargaining with Teamsters Local 527S, the local that Gary belongs to. And there was another group of non-union workers in the same building that were trying to organize. Well, this so-called union employer hired a union buster and started engaging in anti-union conduct directed at its non-union workforce. Meanwhile, they started targeting some of the strongest union supporters, and they laid one of them off in retaliation. So we were out there today in a demonstration in solidarity with those workers as they were engaged in collective bargaining this morning.
Absolutely.
And by the end of the day, actually, we got news that the worker that was laid off was reinstated. So it turns out that some solidarity and collective action, the ability to sit at the table with the employer, can get results. And so we were again witness to that today. So that employer, Tucker Castleberry, continues to be in a labor dispute. And from the information that we have as of this afternoon, they have not made a final agreement with the union. So that was just something we were involved in this morning. Just an average morning for Gary and I.
Yeah, average morning for people that fight for justice, fight for the working class. Heather, there is a war on the workers. And I used to always say that when I did the labor forum on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. There is a war on the workers. We have to get more young people involved to know what unions stand for. When I moved to New York, my cousin got me involved in a union in the garment district. And he told me, he said, always be a member of a union. But unions are not that strong in the South, and that's why you see some people being in the union and some people not being in the union. In New York City, the union that I was in was the Ladies Garment Workers Union. In order to work at a company, you had to be in the union. Here in the South, you don't have to. You can join the union or not join. But
that ain't right. That ain't
right. That ain't right.
You know, in fact, the challenge around so-called right-to-work laws, and even Dr. King and others, beware of the slogans of right to work. They'll dress anything up to make it sound attractive. Even the Koch brothers, Americans for Prosperity, whatever sounds good, they'll put a tag on it. Right to work.
There you go.
Right to work for less. Right to work in poverty. You know,
let's talk about what it means.
Right to work means that unions, who are organizations that workers fought tooth and nail and sacrificed and had to show tremendous courage to form in the first place. These worker organizations, the last place that working people have that's not funded by big government or big business, negotiates contracts, binding agreements with infinitely more powerful employers.
Absolutely.
And gets a fair shake for the workers. The workers ratify and vote on that contract, and then therefore they have tangible victories after their struggle. What right to work says is, in a deliberate attempt to undermine unions' ability to organize in places like the South, is that the company can continue its campaign against the union even after the contract by encouraging workers who benefit from the union not to contribute dues, therefore underfunding the union, making it weaker to get another contract. So it's the only place in our society where, according to the National Labor Relations Act, unions still have to represent a worker who doesn't pay dues.
There you go.
Who's riding on the coattails of his other brothers and sisters out there.
Brother,
it's the only place where we have to perform labor, i.e. representation, for free. Now, if a person doesn't want...
What do you mean, performing labor for free?
We have to represent a worker even if they don't pay union dues.
I see.
We have to make sure that person gets vacation, holiday pay, overtime pay, job security protections, promotions, access to advancement.
So the unions do that?
We have to represent him by law, or her by law, even if they choose to benefit from the union and not help contribute it.
I see.
So that's the fundamental injustice of so-called right-to-work laws, and there's no coincidence that those laws were beginning to get passed once we reached our highest watermark of unionization and density in our country. And around the same time that people started to agitate in the South and elsewhere for racial justice and equality, and the deep concern that the Southern elites and others had around the country,
Absolutely.
that there would be a black, white, brown, there would be a unified movement in the workplaces and in the communities for economic and social justice. That's why they had to weaken unions, and they did it at a critical time.
Critical time.
But that's not enough. It's not enough. It didn't kill unions. It didn't destroy us. In fact, we're still growing today in places like the South. They recently passed the legislation in West Virginia, signed into law by the governor. So that makes it the 26th state, if I'm not incorrect, out of 50. There's 24 states that are non-right to work, and there's 26 states now that are right to work.
Right.
So as far as the South is concerned, then, I mean, virtually all the states are right to work.
That's correct. That's correct.
Yeah.
But the common mythology about the South is that workers don't want unions. No, it's not the case. It's not the case that workers don't want unions. In fact, there's a higher demand for unions in the South, maybe, than there is anywhere else, because the objective conditions, so to speak, are present in all of our workplaces. I mean, low wages, disrespect from management, unsafe working conditions, fatalities on the job, not paid for all the time you work, job insecurity, you name it, okay, are all prevalent, not just in the South, but anywhere you find a workplace, but particularly here. Workers want justice, and they know intrinsically they deserve a voice.
Absolutely.
It's not that workers don't want a union in the South. It's that the means to form a union are so stacked against workers that they have to basically show extraordinary courage and extraordinary amount of organization to be able to beat these corporations back.
You've got to make sacrifice. I mean, Big Joe Turner had a song, Shake, Rattle, and Roll. We've got to shake, rattle, and roll.
Well, on that note, Gary, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back in just a moment. Stay tuned.
Okay.
Again, my name is Heather Gray, and the program is Just Peace, and I'm so pleased to tell you all I have here in the studio with me Gary Washington, WRFG's own Gary Washington, and also Ben Speight with the Teamsters Union, organizer with the union. It's just such a treat to have you in the studio, Ben, this evening, talking about all this.
Yeah, it's a treat, Heather, to be here.
Oh, excellent.
Because I can remember the years that I worked here at WRFG, and you weren't here, and I said, Heather was in the Philippines, and she was writing me these 10-page letters, and I said, we need Heather Gray at WRFG, and now you've been here for probably 20-something years.
Yeah, I have.
Yeah, so that's a good thing.
When I was in the Philippines, I was also writing some about worker issues or farmer issues.
Right.
So now, Ben, let's just talk again now where we are in some of the issues as far as labor is concerned and union rights are concerned, because I know we've seen a dip in this, a slide in the rights of workers and the loss of income and benefits.
Yeah.
It's been, and we can bring up something about the electoral politics around this, because this is something that's being discussed. Maybe not as much by some of the candidates, with the exception perhaps of Bernie Sanders, but I know that the workers out there are certainly bringing this up as well.
Yeah.
So how do you want to respond to that, Ben? Go ahead.
Well, speaking for myself and not the organization that I work for, I would say, I've never saw electoral politics as the most immediate method for workers to have a voice. As critical as legislation is, I didn't think that, particularly from being in the South and sort of coming to politics and labor politics during the Clinton administration and seeing the disastrous policies of corporate free trade that was imposed upon workers then, as the means for us to get justice. And it really wasn't until this presidential cycle, when this candidate, Bernie Sanders, came out. I think many of us, as progressives and socialists and other people that care about working people deeply to our core, as our core principle, didn't really initially think he had much of a chance either. But I thought that it electrified many working people to develop a form of class consciousness that I don't think that we've seen in generations, where people started to identify themselves as working class versus this more aspirational desire to be middle class. Right. And there certainly are middle class people. But most of us, in defining the working class, not by education or by the type of job, but your working class, if your income comes from the selling of your labor to somebody that pays you for your labor. Okay, and that is 99% of us. That's every, you know. So people are starting to have that understanding. I want to point people to a new book that's out. Tamara Drought from Demos wrote a book called Sleeping Giant: How a New Working Class is Remaking America. And that's a sleeping giant, how a new working class is remaking America. And the book is really detailing how from Fight for 15, which is being led, and they're actually having a conference right now for those workers and others in the SEIU, has really demonstrated that through collective action, not just through think tanks and papers about policy, but actually putting the people that are directly impacted by poverty wages in the streets to make demands on their employers for fair wages. That's what changed the debate. I mean, how many years ago did even the demand initially from New York and Chicago come up for $15 an hour? They changed the paradigm in terms of saying, instead of just talking about a living wage, let's actually strike and fight for one. And that's really has galvanized so many people. I mean, look at it today. CWA and IBEW, I believe, were called back to the table by Verizon to come negotiate after 40,000 workers walked off the job, the largest strike in the last 5 years. There are workers all over the country and all over the world, really, right here, that are standing up for fair pay, that are taking on their employers. Some of them are doing that through a union, and some of them are doing that through their own collective activity. I think that we're actually seeing an increase in workers fighting back in this economy. And I'm very encouraged by those signs.
So give some expression. You're seeing that around the country. You're seeing it everywhere, basically, that workers are making more demands now all of a sudden?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, is that, in the past couple of years?
I think that we've seen, in general, a new direction for workers and new strategies being approached by unions. When workers at Uber, for instance, are on their own creating networks online to link up across this very, the spacious geographical lines, they're finding ways to communicate about their issues that they're facing as misclassified drivers in the Uber network. They're suing Uber through class action lawsuits. They're raising, even in this so-called new gig economy, or you want to call it the sharing economy or whatever, as corporations have adapted to try to evade labor law by calling somebody an independent contractor, workers also find ways to adapt and cut across that. Our union, the Teamsters Union, is leading one of the most innovative fights in the country right now of misclassified port truck drivers. These are drivers that haul containers at the port of LA, Long Beach, as well as Savannah. These are mostly immigrant workers in the West Coast, mostly African-American workers in the Southeast and along the East Coast that are hyper-exploited truck drivers that work 50 or 60, 70 hours a week, but aren't paid all the hours they work, and are also misclassified, like the Uber drivers, as independent contractors. So although the crisis is deepening in many ways, there's a reciprocal response from workers that are saying we ain't taking it anymore. But the challenge that we have, getting back to the electoral politics, is how are we as media, how are we as people's organizations getting out there and not just fighting the good fight because it feels good, but how are we actually getting enough people involved so we can win? By winning, it means tangible differences in people's lives, not symbolic differences.
I have some questions along this line I'd just like to ask you. So I maintain, actually, since the Cold War in the 1950s, that we in America, even though there were unions then, right, even though there were unions then, but still, we in America, or most people in America, and particularly so in the South, were afraid to mention the word capitalism, much less to have a dialogue about economic systems and or the rights of workers. It was rough in the South, as you know, Ben. You're from Georgia, right? But the other thing that I've noticed also is that with the neoliberal policies and these so-called free trade policies and agreements and so forth, thanks to Congress and the various presidents that we've had. It's been devastating. They'll say, "Oh, this is good for the economy," but not being in the least bit honest about what this meant for workers. So the reason I'm bringing this up, and I know we can have a long dialogue about that, but it's true that America doesn't make anything anymore.
Right.
So what has that done for workers? I'd be interested in knowing your response. I mean, the jobs are not necessarily there. Is that correct?
Well, it's interesting how they have been able to manipulate that perception in order to benefit their own interest, in the sense that that people that work for a temp agency, and are engaged in manufacturing are not counted by the Bureau of Labor Statistics as manufacturing workers.
Repeat that again.
So those workers that are employed in the manufacturing sector but are employed through a temporary staffing agency are not counted by the Bureau of Labor Statistics as manufacturing workers. So that
why not? Why aren't they?
Well,
so they can distort the figures.
I think in part. So the Glock manufacturing plant that manufactures Glock handguns is in Smyrna, Georgia, and 9 out of the 10 workers that work at that plant, although they market themselves as American-made handguns, are temp workers that don't have the right to form a union. So the end result of calling somebody an independent contractor when really you control them as an employee, or using somebody as a temp when in fact you rely on their labor every day, has caused standards in terms of real income to decline for all working people in every part of the country, but has had in particular the disastrous impacts on workers in states like Georgia.
Absolutely, Georgia. You can have a workplace and it has a union. When they bring in the temp workers, they pay them lesser pay, they get no benefits, and it's to the advantage of the owners of the means of production. I mean, they're doing the same kind of work. I was telling Ben, my brother is a union steward in the Teamsters, 728 for United Parcel. FedEx does the same kind of work, but it's non-union for less pay. If they can figure out a way to use computerization, robotics, and all that to eliminate workers, then next they go in the workplace with those that are left and figure out how to intimidate them.
So I'd like to go back again to this non-union, or organizations or businesses that are non-union. Mm-hmm. Why is FedEx a non-union entity?
Well, FedEx is run by their CEO and chairman of the board, Fred Smith, who is just an ideologically opposed, to unions and is willing to break the law. There's not enough penalties for employers who break the law. In fact, there's no civil penalties for employers that break labor law. There are civil penalties if they discriminate against you for race, gender, but not for national origin, but not for the right to form a union. And the procedures for getting justice through the federal government, the National Labor Relations Board, are so drawn out and so costly that employers don't really have much of a deterrent. But the thing that I really wanted to talk, connecting with that, is that workers at FedEx call us all the time.
Oh, they do. That's interesting. They want it. So what can they do to get? They have to go through all this procedure. You're saying it's very costly in order to do it.
It is. So we as a labor movement have to adapt and find new ways for workers to join unions in the here and now, even if they cannot navigate the bureaucratic mess that is our federal government. So the Fight for 15 is an example of that. Workers are organizing outside of a direct, immediate collective bargaining process. They're still collectively bargaining, but they're collectively bargaining in the streets by going on strike. And that's what those port drivers in Los Angeles are doing too. Look, what this all comes back down to is we're not union and non-union, okay? We're not North and South. We're not black and white. We're not American workers and European and Asian workers. What class consciousness is about is solidarity in action, that we see that because it's the ultimate counter to capitalism. Because what does capitalism do in the labor market? Well, it's in constant search of the cheapest resources and the cheapest. So it doesn't have
the cheapest labor, whatever. Yes, exactly.
There's no ethic to that.
Exactly.
There's just one principle, and that is just dogged, obsessive pursuit of the lowest cost inputs that you can have. Labor being the chief one of those.
Right.
So, if competition amongst labor creates this favorable conditions for capitalists to go and pit us against each other. Well, we'll pit this guy, he'll take the less pay, he'll take the job that he has no rights. What our goal is in the labor movement and for working people is to eliminate the competition between workers. It's not that we want to keep the Oreo jobs in Illinois, and the Nabisco job, whatever, not Nabisco, but the other company that runs Oreo. They laid off 600 of their workers up in Illinois, and they're shipping the jobs, I believe, to Mexico. Mm-hmm. Same thing with the Carrier air conditioning plant. And you see, going back to the presidential campaign, reactionaries like Donald Trump wants to pit American workers for their own benefit, for the benefit of his interest in the billionaires.
Right.
American workers frustration and disappointment with job loss and blame it on somebody of brown skin.
Something
and somebody
Mexican
who's even more exploited.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And I give credit to CWA,
Yeah.
which I don't think it's a coincidence, and I'm not trying to pat them too much on the back, but they are a great union. They did endorse Bernie Sanders. There's a lot of things that we can all do to get better, but one thing that they did do was send delegations of workers from their call centers in the Northeast to the Philippines. The call centers where their jobs were being outsourced, not in a way to shame or blame Filipino workers for taking jobs, paying them $1.70 an hour, but to show them and to grow empathy between workers that we all do the same jobs, we all should have the same rights,
Right.
and we're tired of being pit up against each other. That's what
Absolutely.
class consciousness is
Yeah,
about.
that's what
I
class consciousness is.
I just want our listeners to know that you are listening
Hey,
to
right on.
WRFG Atlanta,
Shake, rattle, and
89.3
roll.
FM. Right. Shake, rattle, and roll. My name is Heather Gray, and the program is Just Peace. And I'm pleased to say I have Gary Washington here in the studio and Ben Speight. We're talking about labor issues. I need
Well,
to
we
say,
having a good time.
I need to say, Ben, that when I started seeing a lot of these U.S. companies going around the world, I thought, well, almost immediately I thought this is going to be hard for American workers, but I thought, well, maybe this will mean that we'll be able to spread unions more around the world.
Right.
That was wishful thinking, wasn't it?
Well, I think that,
Although it's wonderful to hear what you
It
said
is
about what's
wishful
happening
thinking.
in the Philippines.
it is wishful thinking,
Yeah.
and we're terribly under-resourced in terms of the task at hand. And, we're going to be that way until we pony up collectively. And as we saw with the Sanders campaign, the average contribution, mantra that's out there, the fact is that's what's the value of unionism when we pay dues. We control our own finances.
Absolutely.
We determine our own objectives. We don't rely on, and no knock on nonprofits and stuff and everything,
Right.
but we have to have self-funding, and I think that our leaders in the previous movements have often talked about that. That's
Right.
what independence is about.
Right.
But in the absence of that, let me share something with the listening audience
Yeah,
right
go
quick.
right ahead.
This is from the Jay Bookman of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, and I don't subscribe to his recommendations for changing these statistics, but it is illuminating nonetheless because he draws from several sources of data here. But I'm just going to share this with you that was released today. Over the past 15 years, according to the Census Bureau, the percentage of upper and especially middle income households in the 29-county Atlanta metro region has declined significantly, with an offsetting increase in the percentage of low income households. So in the last 15 years, we have seen the middle income, the middle class, so-called middle class, working people with good jobs, decline, and they didn't go up. They went down.
Yeah.
The only major metro region to experience such a steep decline in the middle class was Detroit, Michigan.
Oh, wow. Is that
And
right?
much
My
respect to the
goodness.
people of Detroit. But I thought that, with our Tyler Perrys and our Arthur Blanks,
yeah.
that would skew the numbers a little different. But
Wow.
in fact,
Yeah.
working people in the South, Governor Deal calls the place to do business, well, it's the place to do business on the cheap, on the back of hard-working folks. Between 1999 and 2014, median income households in Georgia fell by $10,700, a decline exceeded only by Michigan. In 1999, we ranked 15th in Georgia in median income. By 2014, 15 years later, we had fallen to 33rd. So,
Wow.
in this economy, when we look around, if you've got a decent job, I say a decent job. Let's say you're making a salary where you feel like you can make your mortgage payments or your rent payments. Let's just leave it at that. And you feel somewhat at a stable place. As long as you're an at-will employee, you can be fired at any time for any reason with or without
Anytime.
notice. We won't even talk about that. But if you look at a fast food worker that's going on strike for $15 an hour, and you say, well, when I worked in fast food, I didn't make 15. I don't make 15 now. Why should that person make 15? You have to understand how labor markets work. And I'm not talking
Right.
about the Milton Friedman Business School economics. I'm talking about real-world economics. When we put demands on people that have the money, whether it's in the Cayman Islands or they have some account in Panama or what,
Right.
they have the money, they have the resources to pay all working people a much greater share of the
Yeah.
profits
A
we
decent
create for
wage.
them. And I'm going to tell you, Heather, they call you all kinds of names and Gary all kinds of names, Lord knows. But even talking about it, you say, when workers demand a better shake, it used to be a no-no to go there and talk about the big C capitalism and talk about them profiting off our labor. I think most young people and millennials, much maligned, have more of a consciousness about what they are owed and what's been taken from them than possibly other generations. Right. So I'm highly optimistic.
I'm going to repeat what I've said a few times on the show, actually.
Go ahead.
That about a couple of years ago, I interviewed Richard Wolff, the economist, the Marxist economist Richard Wolff, and I was telling him what I said earlier, actually going around the South. You couldn't mention the word capitalism, much less have a dialogue about systems. And he said that had been the same thing that's happened to him around the country as well. But along the lines of what you're saying, Ben, since the Occupy movement in 2011, that now there is this consciousness, and we see it referred to all the time, about the 1% versus the 99%.
Absolutely.
People have this sense that there are inequities going on here, and it's not right. And I agree with you with all this money going that we found out about Panama and elsewhere, where people are sneaking their money. This is why we have just huge inequities.
Right.
And also why, at this point, as far as media is concerned, that's why I'm so pleased to have you all here in the studio today.
And I'm glad
there's 6 major corporations that own all of the major media in the United States, and they make the determination about what's said on those airwaves.
I'm glad you mentioned Richard Wolff, because he has an analysis, and he is of another generation. Like with us, Hosea Williams of SCLC was of another generation, but he always said the struggle that we're facing is between the greedy and the needy. And that that will always be as we fight against capitalism, because that's what it's all about. And as Ben talked about FedEx, it made me think about Walmart. I mean, Walmart, the average person that works at Walmart is on food stamps. I mean, how ridiculous is that? They've got a job, but they're not paying anything. And many people that are listening...
that's the wealthiest family, one of the wealthiest families in the world.
The Walmart.
Yeah, right.
And people need to know that.
Yeah.
And people also need to know there are many people out there that are working jobs, and they have to work 2 jobs to pay mortgage and do everything else that Ben is talking about.
Yeah.
It should never be like that. So the working class definitely has a struggle. And I'd like to applaud WRFG for getting this kind of information out, and encourage the people that's out there listening to tell your friends, family, and neighbors about the information that you hear on WR, because you don't hear this on NBC, CBS, corporate media.
No, you don't.
So people need to, send in donations to help keep WRFG on the air. Support WRFG. 523-445-523-8989. Because you're not hearing this. I mean, Ben's giving a good analysis. You talking about Richard Wolff. You giving a good analysis. This information is priceless. It's priceless.
I agree. So, Ben, Gary was talking, people can get some of this information at WRFG. Where else can they go to learn more, to understand more?
Well, I think that, the previous program was always helpful to me, Democracy Now! And others that have been here.
Absolutely.
And, certainly you can find that on the airwaves here at WRFG. But I'm encouraged by, again, people openly talking about this all over, where it's not on the margins. I mean, as people on the left, we used to be kind of weird and different and outsiders and the rest of it, mostly because we've been in times where people have felt defeated and disillusioned, and the forces in play were infinitely more powerful than us. The fact is, this critique is no longer that radical, is it? It's mainstreamed in the sense that when you poll most working people, they know they're getting the stiff, and when you poll most young people, they don't prefer this current economic model, and they don't see it as permanent or as inevitable. So I think that we need to kind of take a step back and realize that people get it. They may not know what the alternative is or how to get there, and that's what our job is as organizers, is to try to teach people, is to work with people and illuminate in them their own skills and a belief in themselves and their own efficacy. They can make a difference in small ways and big ways in their own lives. They don't have to wait for some savior to appear on the ballot. They can actually make these differences now, and what it takes It's people to come together, talking about common issues, finding out who their target is, who's the source of their problems, making a demand, and mobilizing on that target until their demands are met. It's not an arithmetic, but it is a pretty basic set of steps that people take and have throughout history
Right.
to make that difference. It takes collective action and the dogged determination not to give
Right.
up, even if you're pushed back.
You know, I want to mention something else along that line, is that there is a book that was written just this past year by Dr. San Juan. She's Filipino, actually, but she was writing about the Vietnam War activists, right? The anti-Vietnam War activists. And so she interviewed a number of Americans who went to North Vietnam during the war in opposition to the America's involvement with the war. And so what I appreciated about her book, and I heard her give a presentation, a review of this, was that people make the peace, she said. So, and it's true. I mean, that war would not have ended were it not for the huge demonstrations
Absolutely.
in opposition to it for quite a while, actually. So, and the same applies for workers as well.
Yeah.
You know, to provide this opportunity for people to rise up and learn
Right.
more and organize. Am I right, Ben?
No,
Oh,
and it
yeah,
takes
you're
people.
absolutely right.
It takes people stepping out. You know, I've been encouraged. You know, the Teamster history. You know, I'm trying to get as versed as I can be in it. And I look for, just like I look for, you know, white folks in the South that stood on the right side of history as a way of validating, you know, continued work in that critical struggle. I also look forward in Teamster history, our support of Harvey Milk running for mayor in San Francisco
Right,
as the first
exactly.
openly gay candidate.
Exactly,
Also, one
right.
of our leaders out of St. Louis, Harold Gibbons, was a great Teamster leader that did a lot of progressive work in the community, fighting not just on the job, but fighting against the poor conditions in the public housing in St. Louis. And he went over there on a delegation to North Vietnam during the war as a Teamster official. You know, our history is often lost in this.
Goes around and connects.
I guess what I wanted to say also, forgive me just one
Sure.
moment. I just want to add something to the analysis that I just gave and about people making the peace. So also along the lines of what you had said, Ben, it's not so much who's running for president or who's even sitting in the White House, but it's the people putting pressure on the powers that be to make
Right.
changes. And it was even Roosevelt who said, look, you want me to do something about
Yeah.
worker
Yeah.
issues
So
or
you're right.
whatever, come to the White House and make me do
Yeah.
it.
And it was
and-
absolutely done. Yeah,
Yeah, go
Franklin
ahead.
Delano Roosevelt.
Yeah.
But I want to say something about the Vietnam. Just a quick story. I was terminated on my job for a wildcat strike in '72. When I went through arbitration that Andrew Young had set up, I asked the attorney, I want to see my charges. What are you charging? Why are you taking my job that I've had? The first charge that was on the piece of paper that the lawyer gave me was Gary Washington spoke at an anti-war rally against the Vietnam War.
Interesting.
And it was like, what's that got to do with anything? They said, well, the company that you work for is for the war. You're against it. So they don't want you working out there. You know, it was like, I could understand the second charge, which was I was the treasurer of the strike. But Vietnam goes through all kinds of channels.
Where's your right of free speech?
Yeah, I was drafted to go to Vietnam back in '72 when we were on the wildcat strike. My mother asked me, well, what are you going to do? I said, well, I guess I'm going to Leavenworth because I didn't have the knowledge to know how to go to Canada, you know, and all that. So it really hit a nerve when you talked about Vietnam. You know?
Right.
Well, I'll tell you one thing that I'm not going to do, Gary. If this fellow that's running on the Republican ticket gets elected, I am not moving to Canada.
Yeah,
And
good.
I'm not moving to anywhere else because this place belongs to those that built it. And it wasn't built by billionaires. It was built
Definitely.
by working people. It was built by slaves. It was built by people that do the work
There you
and
go.
have that
That's it.
labor, have that profit taken from them. You know, the thing that I get about corporate media is, so we ain't going nowhere, and don't count on that. But the thing you get from corporate media, every one of the stations, and I don't care if they thought they considered themselves liberal-leaning, MSNBC or what the rest of them, they're all owned by the same folks. The thing that they really hang their hat on, Heather, is the impossibility the lack of feasibility, how impractical it is to make sweeping transformative change. That it's not realistic. You need to ground yourself in what's achievable. Be pragmatic.
Good point.
Okay? And it's not that we shouldn't be pragmatic, because, at the end of the day, we want to win. We want results. We need to build on a foundation and move on to the next one. But the thing they can't wrap their heads around with Bernie Sanders' campaign is, why are so many people coming out? And they always try to mitigate his support and say, oh, well, that's just young people, or that's just around a college campus, or that's just this, or that's just that. At its core, it's not about Bernie. At its core, it's about them not wanting us to believe in our own power. Because as soon as we want to believe, as soon as we had a deep belief in our own power, then the skies open up. And I think that's when our imagination is unleashed, and we start to make the kind of demands that we need to make in order to ensure. And here's another statistic for you. If you're okay with this, then turn your radio off right now. Don't listen anymore to any more information that's going to make you want to get out there and try to fight for justice, okay?
Right.
But listen to this. Heather mentioned the manufacturing sector. In fact, in Georgia, we do have a manufacturing sector. The problem is you don't earn enough in the manufacturing sector to provide for a living. But in the University of California, Berkeley Center for Labor just reported that 49% of Georgians working in the manufacturing sector are paid so poorly that we have to rely on public assistance to make ends meet. Gary just talked about it at Walmart. You don't think of somebody putting parts together or doing the core blue-collar work that we've always defined the working class to be, manufacturing. Not retail, not services, we're all working class, but manufacturing. 49% of people that go to work and work with their hands are relying on public assistance. So if I hear one of those people say in the Gold Dome that we need to cut social benefits to people because that safety net's turning into a hammock, as was referenced in this article, what, not just condescending that is, what an insult it is to the realities that workers face every day, but it doesn't have to stay that way.
We're going to take a quick break. We'll be back in just a moment. Stay tuned. So again, my name is Heather Gray. The program is Just Peace, and I'm here in the studio with Gary Washington and Ben Speight. We're talking about labor issues. Ben, I just wanted to mention, along the lines of what you were talking about, many workers being on public assistance, and then we were talking about Walmart as well. I know a lot of those workers are getting food stamps. Just outrageous. The Civil War was fought to rid the country largely of slavery. There were other issues as well, but that was the major one, I think. So. The slave system in the South was largely of individuals, right, who owned slaves.
Right.
And so that, thanks to President Lincoln and so forth, we saw legislation to end slavery in America. But what we've seen in the past few years also in America, and this is thanks to the neoliberal policies, I would say, privatization of a lot of our systems, including the prison system. Including private entities that are involved in the military and so forth.
Right.
We saw a lot of that in Iraq. And now we're seeing more workers who are on public assistance. Now the public assistance, the food stamps or whatever it is they're getting, health care or whatever, is paid for by the taxpayers in America.
Absolutely.
And we are seeing a lot of the wealth leaving America these days thanks to a lot of the wealthy folks, right, are hiding the money that they're making. So I maintain the way the system is today, we no longer have single owning slaveholders. We're all the slaveholders.
Right.
We are now
that's the way to look at it.
now a country of slaveholders.
Does
that make sense?
It does, but to take that example even further is that, and as we've been told over and over again in corporate media over the recent months, is that, don't stop thinking we live in a democracy. We don't live in a democracy. We take your money and we make decisions on your behalf. We take the money that we earn from your labor and we make decisions on your behalf, and we take money out of your check and taxes, and we pay for everything through regressive consumption taxes and sales taxes, and we even pay for our own Social Security out of our own paychecks, even though employers sometimes pay for their share. The fact is that until we take democratic control over the wealth that we create, whether that's siphoned off in taxes or whether that's siphoned off in corporate profits, y'all, this isn't anything that we're, when they tell us that we're asking for handouts, they still fail to understand economics. We're asking for what we earned.
Right.
We're asking for what is due. And I'm going to tell you something about that 13th Amendment that people often, we hold up as a great achievement, historical achievement, the end result of the Civil War. Every high watermark that we get as a result of either war or social struggle and get reforms, there's always that sneaky exception. And the exception is, they'll privatize when it's in their interest. They'll also bring things in-house when it's in their interest, whether it's the convict lease labor or it's, the use of prison labor. If you go to Muskogee County or in Columbus, their residential waste pickups are done by convict labor. So, the use of labor, where they're cheap, free, low wage, at the whim of your employer. Let me tell you something. If you're sitting there thinking this doesn't apply to me because I make $20 an hour, okay, you can make $60 an hour, $80 an hour, okay? If you sneeze wrong, if you ask for a better retirement, if you ask for better working conditions, if the boss just don't like you, there is no security you have on your job, okay? It can be gone like this. So how much savings do you have? How much debt do you have? We are all up to our eyeballs in debt, insecurity, a lack of power. We feel frustrated. We feel demoralized. And we look for ways that affirm that.
Right.
And it's shows like this and other places that say we do matter in the sense that we should raise our expectations and demand a fairer shake. It's not good enough just to get paid a decent wage.
Right.
What about a say? What about dignity? What about safety? What about the opportunity to advancement?
Right.
So all of us, whether you're making $20 an hour or $1 and change, whether you're convict labor, work at Walmart, UPS, drive a truck, the point of this is we need to cut across the things that superficially divide us. The house that we live in, our complexion, our accents. And the only power that we have to turn around these terrible statistics and get away from these cartoon corporate politics and to have a government that is responsive to us, not just responsive to us, run by us, is that we got to start to come together and organize where we're at. It starts small, Gary, just like you saw at the Meade Wildcat strike, but people learn the lessons of struggle that they never can forget. It's almost like a bug. When you gave me that bug on the labor forum about how to organize, you can't get rid of that. It transforms us as individuals as well as our workplaces.
But that information that we have to pass it on. We've got to pass it on to the younger generation. Because like you said, Heather, we're all slaves, and basically there is a war on the workers. No matter if, like Ben was saying, you're convict labor, you work for Walmart. Walmart workers know that their backs up against the wall. When Walmart workers petition for a union, the company closes the store. So they know their situation. And it's just not Walmart, it's just not FedEx, it's just not. So we're just trying to get this across. I think this is a very important program with information that people don't hear all the time. And a lot of people don't want to hear it because they know if they believe what they're hearing, they're going to have to make some kind of sacrifice for justice, like we did in 1972, and even after that.
And speaking about sacrifices, Bernie Sanders isn't the first. Well, he's a Democratic socialist, but he's not the first person to call himself a socialist. And
no, he's not. No,
and to
not
run for president.
And run for president, that's right.
No, in fact, right here in Atlanta, at the Atlanta Federal Penitentiary, we had a man named Eugene Debs.
Exactly, right.
And a union leader, but he wasn't just a union leader. He saw the interest of working people, not just relegated to his home state of Indiana or the Midwest, not just to the continental United States. He saw it as a global interest. So that's why, just like Gary was involved in a strike and a labor protest that turned into coming up about the war in Vietnam, old Eugene Debs was in prison for speaking out against World War I. a place that many of our grandparents died on both sides of the war in the most disastrous human catastrophe.
Yeah,
and he ran for president of the United States right here at the dead end of Boulevard, the Atlanta Federal Penitentiary, and got over 1 million votes. We have it in our history. Examples of not just fighting the right fight. I hate keep fighting the right, keep fighting the good fight. No.
Yeah. That's
Stop
not
the war on workers. No,
That's
it's not good
enough.
enough. Hey, Gary, I don't want to stop the war on workers. I want to win the war on workers by putting working people in power. Are you with me?
I'm with you on that. I'm also think about the name of this program, Just Peace. In order to have just peace, we've got to have justice. And we've got to fight and organize for justice to have just peace. I want peace.
Yeah, because
I don't want to have to fight.
the rulers want to have peace by us bowing our heads and accepting things as they are.
Right. That's not to our advantage.
Right.
Yeah, that's not to our advantage. But
Well,
where does the time go?
The time has gone quickly. We didn't
go.
get a chance to talk about Coca-Cola here, the home of Coke. So I need to get you back, Ben. We need to have a discussion about Coca-Cola, actually.
Well, say something right quick about Coca-Cola. What was you wanting?
Well, there's so much to say. I mean, all that to say is that there was actually an international boycott against Coca-Cola. This was around the apartheid issue, and Coca-Cola claims it got out of South Africa, but it didn't. It was still, offering its taxes and monies actually.
Boy, they got a
to
clever way.
the apartheid government. Yeah, they figured out a way to manipulate a way that it looked as if they were out, but they hadn't got out. So, but it's still. It has a long and egregious history. But yes, and one of the things that people don't recognize is that in Dr. King's last speech that he made in Memphis, he said we need to boycott Coca-Cola.
I don't think you'll hear that quote at the Civil Rights and Human Rights Museum.
No,
that was,
you won't.
Yeah, because Coca-Cola gave the rights away to that land in order to build the Civil Rights and National Civil and Human Rights Museum. I don't say not discouraging people from going down there, but it was Coke washed. It was given by Coca-Cola to make themselves seem like a progressive employer. And they recently came out with a paternity leave, paid paternity and maternity leave policy. But from what I can tell from it, is that it only applies to their corporate offices and not the frontline truck drivers, because they've outsourced them to subsidiaries. Coca-Cola has a terrible record even in this town, and people should look through the propaganda veil of them being on the right side around LGBT issues and the right side on these social issues. But when it comes to their own workforce, they're willing to break the law and to exploit their workers just like every other outfit out there.
So, Ben, I want to thank you so much for being on the show this evening.
It was a pleasure.
Treat.
Thank you for having me.
It was just a treat. And thanks, Gary, so much, as always.